The day my alien roommate moved in started like any normal Thursday, except for the shimmering portal that opened in the corner of the apartment, and the smell of something vaguely metallic mixed with lavender. I had just finished my third cup of coffee and was scrolling through the news when a tall, shimmering figure stepped into the living room. No introduction, no warning, just a statement delivered in a voice that somehow sounded simultaneously musical and slightly alarmed. "I am here to study your species' reproductive efficiency." I blinked. Out loud, I probably said something like, hi. But the alien didn't react to social norms. Instead, they immediately started scanning the room with an odd device that emitted soft pulses of blue light, muttering numbers and chemical formulas I couldn't begin to understand. From the start, I realized this wasn't going to be a normal roommate situation. They weren't just curious. They were methodical, clinical, and completely oblivious to human embarrassment. By the time I made my way to the kitchen, the alien had pulled a small vial from their bag and was sniffing it while scribbling in a holographic notebook suspended midair. "This should enhance pheromone production by 37%, they said, eyes wide and unblinking, apparently unaware that the human concept of personal space was a fragile thing easily shattered by this level of intensity. I tried to explain that humans don't generally measure attraction in percentages or that there's no lab manual for dating, but my words barely registered. They had already moved on to what they called Phase 1 of their human breeding experiment, sprinkling a small mist around the living room designed to test olfactory response. I watched with a mix of horror and morbid fascination as the first effects became apparent. My neighbor, passing by the window, suddenly turned their head and seemed hypnotically drawn to the apartment. Moments later, I could hear them muttering something that sounded suspiciously like a love poem to a lamp. I coughed awkwardly. The alien, oblivious to the chaos outside, seemed thrilled. "Observation: human olfactory receptors are far more responsive than preliminary data suggested," they said, scribbling rapidly. They didn't notice I was tiptoeing around the apartment, trying to discreetly open windows without drawing the attention of any more random humans. One of their enhancement devices, a small crystal humming with an eerie light, hovered near the doorway, and I had to wrestle it down before it activated on the staircase. By the end of that morning, I was already exhausted from playing cleanup while my roommate, who seemed simultaneously innocent and dangerously competent, treated the entire apartment like a laboratory. Meal times were no less bizarre. The alien insisted that certain foods would increase libido if combined in precise ratios and presented in visually appealing formations. I found myself eating a breakfast of what appeared to be rainbow-colored paste topped with sparks of something that smelled faintly like electricity. They described the taste as optimal for hormonal activation, and I nodded like I understood, though my taste buds disagreed violently. Every time I tried to ask them a simple question, like whether the neighbors might notice the strange smells and behaviors, the alien either ignored me or replied with detailed notes about pheromone concentration and the efficiency of mating signals. The first signs of chaos were subtle but unmistakable. Strangers passing the apartment on the street started lingering, laughing a little too eagerly, or staring at nothing in particular with wide eyes. I could see one jogger trip over their own feet while apparently daydreaming about something romantic, and a mail carrier lingered in the doorway long enough that I had to pretend I was busy dusting the floor. Each incident escalated my panic and the alien's excitement. "The subjects display heightened attraction responses," they reported cheerfully. I groaned, trying to shield the apartment from the growing hormonal storm. By mid-afternoon, the apartment itself seemed to buzz with a strange energy. The alien had set up small devices around the living room and hallway, each softly pulsing and sending tiny colored lights dancing across the walls. They explained each one as part of an efficiency optimization network. I stared at them, bewildered, imagining how this might be presented back on their home planet as scientific brilliance, completely unaware of the havoc it was causing on Earth. A couple of random strangers had appeared on our doorstep, lingering like bees drawn to honey, murmuring unintelligible compliments and awkwardly offering flowers they had clearly picked from someone else's garden. I tried to shoo them away, but the alien gently intercepted each approach, adjusting their devices as if fine-tuning a musical instrument. Even my own responses were affected, though I tried to hide it. The aliens' experiments seemed to make me more flustered, my pulse quicker, and my thoughts scattered. Whenever I attempted to maintain a serious tone or give directions, the alien misinterpreted it as encouragement or consent, scribbling notes in their floating notebook and occasionally touching my arm to measure sympathetic responses. Each touch was innocent on their part, but left me struggling to keep my composure and suppress a blush that seemed increasingly impossible to hide. By evening, the effects had spread further than I could have imagined. Neighbors were talking in hushed tones about the strange energy around our building. One elderly man appeared to be practicing poetry recitations in the hallway, and a dog walker had started serenading passers-by with improvised love songs. I had no idea whether I should laugh, cry, or run away. Meanwhile, my alien roommate hovered in the middle of the chaos, completely engrossed, jotting down observations and occasionally adjusting devices mid-air with delicate precision. "Fascinating," they murmured. "Human mating behaviors are more unpredictable than anticipated." I finally realized that the day would end with me covering for every strange reaction, hiding every small disaster, and desperately trying to keep the neighborhood from suspecting the true cause: my alien roommate's naive enthusiasm for studying human attraction. As I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted from chasing after floating devices, whispering apologies to random strangers, and holding back laughter at the absurdity, the alien looked at me expectantly. "Tomorrow, Phase 2, they announced cheerfully, as though that would make everything better. I just groaned, realizing that my life had officially turned into a rom-com run by a hormone-crazed extraterrestrial. By the time the lights dimmed, I was hiding under a blanket, reflecting on the chaos and the strange, inexplicable thrill of having an alien roommate who seemed genuinely fascinated by everything about human romance. The apartment smelled faintly of metallic lavender, there were mysterious sparks dancing across the furniture, and somewhere outside, a stranger was probably composing a love poem for a mailbox. I realized, with a mixture of dread and amusement, that this was only the beginning, and that somehow, the line between human embarrassment and alien curiosity was going to keep getting blurrier. The next morning started with a strange, buzzing anticipation in the apartment, as if the air itself had been charged overnight by the aliens' devices. I groaned as I stumbled out of bed, already sensing that today would be far worse than yesterday. My alien roommate hovered in the center of the living room, their limbs stretching in odd, elegant angles as they adjusted small, glowing orbs that floated silently around the room. "Today, we accelerate human mating efficiency," they announced with gleeful seriousness, their voice carrying a musical lilt that made it impossible not to shiver slightly at the thought of their enthusiasm. I groaned, rubbing my temples, and tried to come up with a strategy to survive the day without accidentally turning our neighborhood into a chaotic romance experiment. The first signs were immediate. As I opened the apartment door to step outside, the air seemed thick with a subtle, sweet scent that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't overpowering, yet. By the time I reached the staircase, I realized the aliens' hormonal devices had been cranked up far more than intended. Our neighbor, a quiet librarian who usually nodded politely and disappeared into the building, suddenly appeared at the doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked suspiciously like they had been stolen from a public park. "I thought you might like these," they stammered, their cheeks a deep crimson, eyes darting around nervously as if they'd been caught committing some great crime. I swatted at the flowers, trying to act casual, while my alien roommate tilted their head curiously, taking meticulous notes. "Fascinating response. Extreme attraction manifests in the presence of scented molecules," they muttered, eyes gleaming with excitement. On the street, the chaos escalated rapidly. Joggers tripped over invisible obstacles, muttering romantic confessions at lampposts. A delivery person lingered far too long at my door, offering a timid kiss to the doormat before realizing, too late, that it was inappropriate. I had to pull them back inside and apologize profusely while my alien roommate floated in midair, scribbling notes, and occasionally tapping one of the glowing orbs to amplify the effect. "Adjusting stimulus levels," they explained cheerfully. "We must maximize response for complete data acquisition." I cursed under my breath, trying to figure out how to contain this hormonal storm without it spreading to the entire block. Even my own coworkers weren't safe. I had to go out briefly to grab coffee, and every barista in the shop seemed unusually flustered, whispering compliments, blushing furiously, and fumbling drinks. One of them accidentally poured a latte over their own arm while gazing dreamily at me, and I could barely stop myself from laughing. My alien roommate, who had apparently followed me invisibly, floated near the counter, measuring the air and jotting down the results with a satisfied hum. Intriguing, they murmured. Sympathetic neural responses exceed predicted thresholds. Must document for planetary archives. I gritted my teeth, thinking that planetary archives could probably survive without this much chaos in one neighborhood. By midday, the effects were fully undeniable. Strangers appeared from nowhere, drawn like bees to some unseen nectar. A man in a business suit tried to serenade me with a bizarre love song while balancing a tray of pastries. A pair of teenagers argued loudly over who had the right to hold my hand for a brief scientific observation. I dodged, ran, and redirected people with frantic gestures, muttering excuses I hoped sounded plausible. My alien roommate observed it all, floating calmly in the chaos, eyes wide and sparkling with delight. Your species' social responses are far more unpredictable than anticipated, they said. Behavioral variance is highly instructive. Things got worse when the hormonal storm extended to the local cafe. The effects amplified by the aliens' devices caused two baristas to begin an impromptu duet of affection toward each other while simultaneously glancing at me with longing eyes. A regular customer attempted to recite an entire romantic poem to my coffee cup, apparently forgetting that I was standing right there. I ducked behind a table, trying to disappear into the furniture, while my alien roommate floated above, clapping their hands in encouragement. Excellent! Social experimentation at peak efficacy, they declared, seemingly oblivious to the disaster unfolding. I felt like I was starring in a rom-com from which I couldn't escape, except the entire cast was being controlled by a mischievous alien scientist. Even my own feelings were unexpectedly affected. The aliens' experiments seemed to heighten my own flustered responses, making it harder to remain composed. Every accidental touch, every unintended glance, and every poorly timed compliment from a stranger sent my pulse racing. I caught myself blushing as the alien observed quietly, their notes meticulous and detailed, occasionally glancing at me with a hint of curiosity that made me feel both embarrassed and strangely intrigued. For all their clinical detachment, I suspected they didn't fully understand the effect they were having, not just on the humans around us, but on me as well. By late afternoon, the neighborhood was in full hormonal uproar. Strangers who had never met before were pairing up in the middle of the street, whispering sweet nothings, holding hands, or attempting awkward kisses. Dogs barked enthusiastically at humans expressing sudden romantic intentions. A street musician had abandoned their instrument entirely to kneel before a mailbox and profess undying love. I ran from one end of the block to the other, trying desperately to calm people down while my alien roommate followed, utterly fascinated. Observations indicate a strong positive correlation between pheromonal intensity and behavioral exaggeration, they commented, jotting notes as if they were describing butterflies rather than human chaos. When evening finally rolled around, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted beyond measure. The apartment reeked faintly of alien chemistry, and tiny sparks danced across the furniture where the devices had malfunctioned slightly. My alien roommate floated above, entirely unbothered by the chaos they had caused, adjusting one last orb in anticipation of tomorrow's experiments. Tomorrow, Phase 3, they said, their tone bright and enthusiastic, as if this were a simple homework assignment rather than a full-scale public spectacle. I groaned, realizing that surviving Phase 2 had been a Herculean effort, and that the days ahead would only escalate. As I sat there, catching my breath, I couldn't help but notice the subtle, inexplicable thrill in all of this. Despite the chaos, the embarrassment, and the absurdity of watching my neighborhood turn into a hormonal carnival, a part of me couldn't deny that having an alien roommate fascinated by human mating behaviors was exhilarating. The line between terror and curiosity, embarrassment, and attraction, was blurring, and I knew that Phase 3 would push everything even further. I could only hope I would survive it with my dignity, sanity, and maybe a few laughs intact. By the next morning, it felt like the entire city had become collateral damage in my alien roommate's obsessive study of human romance. The apartment was humming faintly with residual energy from the previous day's hormonal storm, and tiny floating devices pulsed softly in anticipation. I could barely get out of bed without tripping over one of them, and I knew that stepping outside would mean facing the chaos once more. My alien roommate hovered midair, tinkering with an orb that had somehow expanded overnight into a glowing sphere the size of a beach ball. "Today, we extend our study to external social networks," they announced brightly. I groaned, realizing that meant coworkers, friends, and anyone remotely within a 10-block radius were about to be thrown into their unwitting experiment. The first stop was my office, a small space filled with cubicles and mostly polite people who had no idea what was about to descend upon them. The moment I opened the door, subtle changes became obvious. A normally stoic colleague began humming flirtatious tunes under their breath, while another tripped over their own feet as they leaned toward a chair they had somehow convinced themselves I was occupying. My alien roommate floated above my shoulder, making soft humming noises that apparently calibrated the device's output. Every time someone glanced in my direction, I noticed exaggerated blushing, sudden giggles, and accidental touches that made the office feel like a rom-com set. I moved quickly, trying to redirect people with casual gestures while muttering apologies I hoped sounded professional. Things got worse during my morning meeting. The hormonal effects had intensified. A normally composed manager began complimenting coworkers in ways that made them squirm with confusion and delight simultaneously. One person tried to offer a love poem to the water cooler, apparently forgetting the rest of us existed. I whispered frantic instructions to my alien roommate, who merely floated and scribbled notes. "Observation: human competitive affection increases when multiple subjects are simultaneously affected," they murmured, as if the escalating chaos were data points rather than an office disaster. My attempts to remain inconspicuous failed spectacularly when a colleague suddenly attempted to kiss my hand in the middle of a presentation. I shoved it away, mumbling incoherently, while my alien roommate tilted their head in apparent fascination. By lunchtime, the effects had spread beyond the office. On the street outside, passers-by were forming impromptu love triangles, chasing each other around trees and street lamps in a manner that looked like a bizarre, uncoordinated dance. Delivery people lingered too long at doorways, pedestrians interrupted their errands to declare adoration for inanimate objects, and stray pets began participating enthusiastically in the romantic displays. I ran from scene to scene, trying desperately to mitigate the effects while my alien roommate followed, observing quietly, occasionally adjusting floating devices or sprinkling a strange powder that made passers-by collapse into giggling fits. Each adjustment seemed to amplify the absurdity rather than control it. Friends who came over for coffee were not spared. As soon as they entered the apartment, they began gesturing wildly, offering awkward hugs, and whispering strange compliments. One friend even attempted to recite an entire love poem backwards, convinced it was the most romantic thing imaginable. I tried to redirect everyone calmly, hiding the aliens' devices under books, behind plants, and inside drawers. Meanwhile, my alien roommate floated nearby, scribbling notes in midair and murmuring observations about the variability of human romantic response under intense hormonal influence. Their voice carried a musical undertone that made even my friends blush harder whenever they spoke, compounding the chaos. Even in public spaces, the effects were undeniable. At a cafe I had hoped would be a safe neutral zone, the hormonal storm caused people to serenade each other, compete for attention in increasingly elaborate ways, and unintentionally trip over furniture while gazing dreamily at me. One barista fainted mid-compliment, and ended up being comforted by another customer who promptly declared their undying devotion to them. I ducked behind a table, trying not to laugh, curse, or draw attention, while my alien roommate floated silently above, adjusting a glowing orb like a conductor leading an invisible symphony. Note: human social hierarchy does not inhibit affectionate competition, they commented. I groaned, realizing I was now managing not only my own embarrassment but also a miniature society-wide rom-com disaster. By late afternoon, the effects began manifesting in more subtle, unpredictable ways. Complete strangers approached me in whispers, offering cryptic confessions of love or admiration. I ran errands, trying to avoid attention, but at each turn, a new admirer appeared, sometimes doubling back, sometimes chasing after me. Even my own reflection in shop windows seemed to provoke mild, flustered responses in passers-by. I felt trapped in a comedy of errors orchestrated by my alien roommate, who remained blissfully unaware of the destruction their scientific study had caused. Each note they scribbled floated in midair, full of intricate symbols and diagrams that I couldn't begin to interpret. Romantic tension between the alien and me grew, though either of us addressed it directly. Every time I tripped, blushed, or accidentally flinched when a stranger lunged toward me, the alien floated nearby, silently observing my responses. There was an awkward intimacy in their fascination. Their wide, curious eyes seemed to note every heartbeat and every subtle blush. I realized that in the midst of chaos, I was becoming oddly aware of them, not just as a roommate, but as a being whose curiosity and innocence made the absurdity feel strangely endearing. My pulse would quicken whenever they adjusted a device near me, and I caught myself laughing nervously at the smallest things they did. As evening approached, the apartment became a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Strangers lingered on the street outside, couples walked around holding hands in exaggerated displays of affection, and pets frolicked as if caught in the hormonal maelstrom. I sank into the couch, exhausted from running, redirecting, and mitigating disasters all day. My alien roommate floated in midair, adjusting a tiny orb with delicate precision, humming happily. Observation: humans adapt remarkably well to unexpected romantic stimuli, they said, tilting their head. I groaned, realizing that adaptation included near fainting, accidental declarations of love, and at least 3 people who now considered me their soulmate. Despite the exhaustion, there was a strange, undeniable thrill. Watching the world react unpredictably to the aliens' experiments was chaotic, hilarious, and slightly intoxicating. And somewhere in the midst of the absurdity, I noticed a subtle change in the aliens' behavior. Their fascination with humans seemed to extend beyond pure data. There were moments when their gaze lingered on me longer than necessary, a curious tilt of the head, a small smile that didn't belong to any known human expression. Amid the chaos of hormones, confessions, and slapstick public disasters, there was a hint of something far more intimate forming between us. By the time the night fell, the apartment hummed with residual energy, and the devices floated silently, pulsing gently as if waiting for the next day. I collapsed into the couch, utterly drained but still vaguely exhilarated. My alien roommate hovered nearby, adjusting one last orb, humming softly, and jotting notes in midair. Tomorrow, they promised, would be Phase 4. I knew without a doubt that survival would be challenging, sanity optional, and the romance, however chaotic, unavoidable. By the time morning came, I already knew that today was going to be catastrophic. The residual energy from my alien roommate's previous experiments made the apartment feel like a softly buzzing greenhouse of pheromones and strange lights. The floating devices that had caused so much chaos in the past days were now pulsing in unison, casting strange shadows across the walls. My roommate hovered in the center of the living room, their translucent limbs stretching in angles that looked impossibly graceful and completely unnatural. Phase 4 begins today, they announced, voice bright and musical, like they were about to launch a holiday celebration rather than conduct a city-wide romantic experiment. I groaned, feeling the familiar mixture of dread and faint thrill, and tried to brace myself for the hormonal hurricane I knew was coming. The first few hours were predictably absurd. Strangers began appearing almost instantly outside our apartment, drawn like bees to a luminous flower. One jogger ran in circles around the street lamp, muttering what sounded like love poems to pigeons. Another passerby, a normally stoic man in a suit, kneeled dramatically in the middle of the sidewalk, offering a bouquet of wildflowers to a mailbox. I tried to intervene, waving my arms, shooing people back, and muttering explanations about misplaced romantic impulses, but my alien roommate floated above, scribbling in midair and occasionally adjusting a small orb that emitted a faint violet glow. Observation: human public displays of affection amplify under sustained pheromone exposure. They commented cheerfully, completely oblivious to the fact that our block now resembled a rom-com battlefield. Even my errands were no longer safe. At the corner cafe, 2 baristas had abandoned their workstations entirely, performing elaborate, synchronized gestures of admiration toward one another while periodically glancing in my direction. A regular customer tripped over their own feet while attempting to recite an impromptu ode to me, narrowly missing a stack of cups. I ducked behind a table, trying to avoid eye contact, while my alien roommate floated above, smiling as they made minute adjustments to the floating orb. Fascinating, competitive affection triggers a rapid increase in social engagement, they murmured. I groaned, wondering if anyone could survive intact through this chaotic experiment. The most absurd moment came when a neighbor attempted to serenade me while balancing a small dog on their shoulder and juggling a tray of pastries. The dog, apparently affected by the hormonal storm, barked enthusiastically at my passing shadow, adding a chaotic soundtrack to the scene. I tried to redirect them, but each gesture seemed to inspire more intense declarations of affection. Across the street, another trio of strangers argued over who had the right to hold my hand, their debate punctuated by sudden blushing and flustered laughter. I was running from one ridiculous situation to another, muttering frantic apologies, while my alien roommate floated serenely above, clearly thrilled by the chaos. By midday, I realized that the devices had pushed the hormonal effects far beyond reasonable levels. Random humans were pairing up in complex love triangles, singing, dancing, and sometimes collapsing from flustered excitement. A street musician had abandoned their instrument entirely to kneel before a traffic cone, declaring eternal devotion. Even my own feelings were difficult to ignore. Every accidental touch, every panicked glance, every exaggerated blush made me acutely aware of the alien hovering nearby. There was something in their curiosity, in the gentle tilt of their head and the meticulous notes they scribbled, that made my pulse quicken. Despite the chaos, I couldn't deny a strange thrill, a subtle warmth in the middle of absolute absurdity. Finally, when the sun began to set, I confronted my alien roommate. Exhausted, I grabbed one of their glowing orbs and waved it around, trying to get them to stop. Enough, I said, voice shaky but firm. This is too much. The humans, the pets, the pigeons, it's too much. My alien roommate tilted their head, eyes wide and curious, and floated closer, their fingers brushing mine lightly. Observation: humans display increased agitation when overwhelmed by external stimuli, they said softly. Then, almost hesitantly, they added, "But I find your reactions intriguing." My pulse jumped, and I realized that in all the chaos, something between us had shifted. We retreated to the apartment, shutting the door against the remaining chaos outside. My alien roommate hovered near me, adjusting one last orb with careful precision. For the first time, they seemed almost shy, as if unsure how to proceed without their experiments as a crutch. I laughed, lightly teasing them about the experiment of a lifetime, while secretly feeling my own heart racing. Maybe human attraction isn't something you can optimize, I said. Maybe it's just chaotic. They tilted their head, eyes glimmering, and I realized they understood, more than understood, perhaps they felt it too. As the night fell, the apartment quieted, though faint traces of the day's chaos lingered, a stray flower on the counter, a dog leash twisted around a chair, and the soft hum of a still glowing orb. My alien roommate hovered beside me, scribbling one last note in midair, then paused and looked at me directly. The faint blush on their cheeks, or whatever counted as a blush in their species, made me smile. For the first time, the scientific fascination seemed to merge with something entirely personal, entirely human. The chaos of hormones, public disasters, and absurd romantic encounters had culminated not just in comedy, but in a subtle, awkward, undeniable intimacy between us. By the time I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and exhilarated, I realized the truth. surviving the alien roommate's experiments wasn't just about dodging flustered strangers or chaotic public spectacles. It was about navigating the unpredictable mess of feelings, laughter, and curiosity that had grown between us. My roommate floated nearby, humming softly, their devices dimming, their gaze lingering on me just a moment too long. Tomorrow, there would undoubtedly be more experiments, more chaos, and more absurdity. But somehow, I didn't mind. Because amidst all the hormonal storms and public disasters, a subtle, messy, chaotic romance had taken root, and I had a feeling it was only going to get stranger, funnier, and more intoxicating with every passing day.